let's talk about something that feels pretty unthinkable. But the whole point of this is to replace that fear with actual practical knowledge. This isn't some Hollywood fantasy. It's about the real science and the strategy behind surviving a nuclear event. And we're going to focus on the most critical window of all, those first 72 hours.
It all starts with a question like this. This one came from a user on Reddit, and it's perfect because it just cuts right through all the noise. It makes this huge abstract threat feel incredibly personal. Suddenly it's not about geopolitics, right? It's about you, your family, and what you would actually do if the worst were to happen.
All right, let's get into it. The first moments after a detonation are going to be pure chaos. But your actions in this tiny, tiny sliver of time, they are absolutely critical. What you do right then and there can literally determine everything that comes after. Now, I want you to forget everything you've seen in the movies. After that initial blinding flash in the blast wave, you don't have hours to figure things out. You have about 15 minutes. That's it. Just 15 minutes to find the best shelter you possibly can before the radioactive fallout, which is the real long-term danger for most survivors, starts to rain down from the sky. The clock is officially ticking.
So, your absolute #1 priority is to get inside, and not just any building, but the most solid one you can find. Think basements or the middle of a big, sturdy building. What you're doing is trying to put as many walls, as much dense stuff as you can between you and the outside world. And let me just be crystal clear about this. Your car is not a shelter. It offers pretty much zero protection from radiation. Get out of the car and get inside.
For most people who actually survive the initial blast, the real enemy isn't the explosion itself. It's the silent, invisible killer that comes after, nuclear fallout. And understanding what the stuff is, well, that's the key to understanding how to survive it.
So, what is fallout, really? The idea is pretty simple. It's basically just dirt, dust, and little bits of debris from the blast site that have been pulverized, superheated, irradiated, and then shot way up into the atmosphere. This radioactive cocktail can then get carried by the wind for hundreds of miles before it eventually, falls out of the sky.
You can think of it as a 3-step process. First, the incredible force of the explosion just pulverizes everything in its path, turns it to dust. Second, the intense radiation from the nuclear reaction zaps all that debris, making it radioactive. And third, the classic mushroom cloud carries all this toxic material high up into the stratosphere, where it's just waiting for the wind to spread it around.
And here's something really important. Not all bombs create the same amount of fallout. An airburst, where the bomb goes off high in the air and the fireball doesn't touch the ground, that creates a massive blast wave, but actually produces way less fallout. The one you really have to worry about is a surface burst. That's the real fallout maker. It sucks up tons of dirt and debris, irradiates it, and creates a huge, deadly plume. That's the scenario that you have to be ready for. Okay, I know this can feel overwhelming, but the actual survival strategy boils down to 3 simple, powerful words. This is what emergency planners use, and it's your key to safety. Just remember, time, distance, and shielding. Let's start with time. Fallout is like a fire that burns hottest right at the beginning. Its radioactivity decays incredibly fast. Those first 72 hours are when the radiation is at its most intense, its most lethal. That's why the #1 rule is get in your shelter and stay put for at least 3 days. Time is actually on your side, but only if you have the patience to wait it out.
All right, next up, distance. And this one is pretty much common sense, right? The farther you are from the source of the radiation, the less of a dose you get. As that Reddit user pointed out, being even 20 miles away from a major blast can be the difference between life and death. So while your immediate goal is to shelter where you are, your long-term goal is going to be to get farther away from the hot zones.
And finally, shielding. This is all about putting a physical barrier between you and those dangerous gamma rays. The denser the material, the better it works. So we're talking about earth, concrete, bricks, even thick stacks of books like you see here. Every layer helps. I mean, we know from Hiroshima that some people survive just a few hundred meters from ground zero because they happen to be inside reinforced concrete basements. Shielding works. Okay, so we've established that shelter is your absolute #1 priority. But what actually makes a shelter good? Let's dig into some really practical advice pulled straight from old-school civil defense manuals.
So if you have to make an improvised shelter, you have to start thinking like a survivalist. First, make sure you're not in a place that's going to flood. Stay away from things that can easily catch fire. And you got to check the soil. The Nuclear War Survival Skills Manual actually has this simple thumb test. If you can't push your thumb more than an inch into the dirt, it's stable enough to dig a trench shelter. Simple, right?
And don't think this is some impossible task. That same manual points out that totally untrained families in simulated crisis situations have successfully built effective fallout shelters in less than 2 days with just basic hand tools. The secret is using plain old dirt as your main shielding material. See, it's not about having some fancy bunker. It's about practical, real-world survival.
So you're in your shelter. The fallout is coming down outside. Now the real test begins, the waiting game. Let's break down exactly what's happening during these first crucial 3 days and why just staying put is the ultimate winning strategy.
This right here, this is the science that will save your life. It's a principle called radioactive decay, and it happens shockingly fast. As you can see, the danger literally plummets with every hour that you wait. After just 2 days, the levels drop in a major way. By the 1-week mark, about 90% of the initial radiation is just gone. And after 2 weeks, 99% gone. This is exactly why waiting is everything.
Now, here's some of the grim math of survival. This triage chart shows how radiation exposure just dramatically worsens the outcome for any kind of physical injury. Look at these categories. An injury that would normally be totally survivable can easily become fatal when you combine it with even a moderate dose of radiation. Why? Because radiation absolutely cripples your body's ability to heal itself. Avoiding that initial dose is everything.
And here's a look at what radiation is actually doing on a microscopic level. It hunts down and attacks the most rapidly dividing cells in your body. On the left, you see healthy bone marrow, just teeming with life-giving cells. And on the right, well, it's devastated. The damage is just catastrophic. This is what leads to acute radiation syndrome. Your body's factory for making blood, fighting infection, and healing itself just gets wiped out.
So let's say you make it. You do everything right, you get through the first 72 hours. You have won the first, and by far the most dangerous battle. But surviving the fallout is really just the beginning. A whole new, and in some ways much more difficult, reality is waiting for you.
As a lot of people have pointed out in these online discussions, the real long-term challenge is the complete collapse of civilization as we know it. The electrical grid, water purification, the healthcare system, global supply chains, poof, all gone. Suddenly, a small cut could be a fatal infection. Finding clean water and food becomes the new full-time job for every single person who's left.
When you really get down to it, knowledge and preparation, they can get you through that immediate radioactive threat. But the world that emerges after those first 3 days will be fundamentally broken. Survival is the first step for sure. Rebuilding is the next. And so the final question isn't just how to survive, but what you would do next. Could you rebuild?